I want you to just imagine for a moment that you are a genetically perfected super soldier.
Right, like the absolute peak of biological engineering.
Exactly. You are a warrior bred for one singular purpose. You're heavily armored, you're, you're functionally immortal, and you are conditioned to feel absolutely no fear.
Which is hard to even wrap your head around, honestly.
It is. Because you've faced down towering alien monstrosities, right? You've walked through artillery bombardments that literally vaporize entire cities around you.
You've thought literal demons torn right out of the fabric of nightmares.
Yeah, exactly. Demons. And none of it breaks you. But then, you are finally wounded on the battlefield. You're paralyzed, looking up at this smoke-choked sky, and you hear footsteps approaching.
And you're not afraid of dying because of your conditioning.
Right. Death is just part of the job. But when you see the figure standing over you, a medic, but he's draped in this flayed skin coat, holding not a healing serum, but like a surgical saw and a collection of extraction vials for the very first time in your augmented life, you feel cold, absolute terror.
Oh, because you know this medic isn't there to save your life.
Exactly. He is here to harvest your biology.
It's just the ultimate inversion of trust, isn't it? It strikes at this very specific, deeply existential dread.
It really does. I mean, we are usually so accustomed to fearing the unknown, like the alien threat from the void or wild forces of nature or just the things lurking in the dark.
Right, the traditional monsters. But the scenario you just laid out, it taps into something far more insidious. We're talking about the weaponization of the very science that is supposed to preserve us.
That is exactly what we are diving into today. A universe where the most terrifying monsters aren't born in the wild. They are deliberately, painstakingly engineered in a laboratory.
It's a fascinating, terrifying concept.
So today we are exploring the chaotic, sprawling, and deeply dystopian setting of the 41st millennium. And specifically, our deep dive today focuses on a faction known as the Creations of Bile.
Yes, a very unique group in this lore.
Our mission for this deep dive is to extract the core themes from our sources on this group and really understand a truly chilling concept. Basically, what actually happens when the power of biological creation is completely and totally divorced from morality.
It is a dark journey, I will say that. But it's an absolutely necessary one if we really want to understand the extremes of the transhuman condition within this setting.
Right.
Because we are going to explore the profound psychological and philosophical terrors that this faction represents. The specific biological mechanisms of their existence and how they fundamentally alter the very concept of warfare.
I just find this whole setup utterly captivating. It's horrifying, obviously, but you just cannot look away. So let's unpack the architect of all these nightmares.
It's a mastermind himself.
Exactly, Fabius Bile. I mean, he goes by a lot of titles in the lore, right?
Absolutely. The Clone Lord is a big one. Also, the Spider.
Right, but the one that really anchors this entire discussion, I think, is his original title, the Chief Apothecary of the Emperor's Children.
That is such a crucial detail.
And just for those listening who might need a quick refresher on the setting, the Emperor's Children were one of the original legions of genetically engineered super soldiers, the Space Marines created by the Emperor of Mankind to defend humanity.
Yes, the absolute elite of the elite.
And Fabius Bile was their chief medical officer.
Which is where the horror truly begins, honestly.
Yeah.
To understand the gravity of that title, Chief Apothecary, we have to look at what an apothecary actually does, both historically and within this specific universe.
Right, because an apothecary is basically a healer.
Exactly. They are the preservers of life. And in the context of a Space Marine Legion, the apothecary is arguably the most vital member of that brotherhood.
Because of the gene seed, right?
Yes, the gene seed. Space Marines are created using these specialized genetic organs implanted into a human host. So when a Space Marine falls in battle, it is the apothecary's sacred duty to extract that gene seed so it can be implanted into a new recruit.
Wow, so they are the literal guardians of the Legion's future.
They are. They are entrusted with the absolute deepest vulnerabilities of these warriors.
I mean, you trust the medic in the trench with you. You expose your throat to them because you know they took an oath to protect you.
Precisely. And Bile has completely inverted this sacred role. He takes that incredibly intimate molecular knowledge of biology that was meant for healing and preservation, and he weaponizes it.
He just turns salvation into horrific manipulation.
He does. He isn't putting warriors back together to save them, He is taking them apart to see if he can rebuild them into something more useful to him.
It is the ultimate betrayal of the medical profession.
It really is. because he views the human body, even the genetically perfected body of a space marine, not as a life to be saved, but basically as a rough draft waiting to be edited.
The sheer scale of his arrogance is just staggering to me. We are talking about a universe where the Emperor of Mankind is revered as a literal godlike figure.
Right. He's the pinnacle creator.
He engineered the Space Marines, the greatest warriors in existence, using gene craft that took centuries to perfect. And Fabius Bile just looks at that absolute apex of biological mastery and says, yeah, it's a good start, but I can do better.
It requires a level of narcissism that borders on the divine, frankly, to look at the emperor's work and view it merely as raw material.
I was actually trying to think of how to picture this level of desecration. It's like, okay, imagine a master artist, let's say Michelangelo, right?
Okay, I'm with you.
He spends years on his back, painstakingly painting the Sistine Chapel, creating this transcendent masterpiece of human achievement.
Right.
And then this highly skilled but utterly deranged anatomy student walks in, looks up at the ceiling, and decides the only way to prove his own genius is to take a literal scalpel to the plaster, carve it out, and stitch his own grotesque canvas made of human tissue right over the top of it.
That is a very vivid image.
Right. But he isn't just creating art. He is overwriting the sacred to force you to look at his brilliance.
That analogy captures the desecration perfectly, though. Bile isn't just building something new in a vacuum. He is actively corrupting the foundation of what came before.
Overwriting the sacred with the profane.
Exactly. Because to him, the emperor's work is stagnant. It's finished. Bile fundamentally believes that life must constantly be pushed, mutated, and forced to evolve.
Okay, but I have to push back here, or at least challenge the core motive a bit. Because if he just wants to prove he's better than the emperor, if it's purely about ego and narcissism, why doesn't he try to conquer the galaxy?
That's a good question.
Because usually megalomaniacs want a throne, right? They want statues built of themselves. But Bile doesn't seem to want a throne, he just wants a laboratory. So is this drive of his genuinely born out of a twisted scientific curiosity?
Or is it ego?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is he doing this because he truly wants to understand the absolute limits of biology? Or is the science just a very complex way of massaging his own ego?
That is a phenomenal distinction to make. And I think the answer is, why not a throne? Because to Bile, a throne is static. A throne is political, and politics are completely beneath him.
Oh, that makes sense.
I would argue that his scientific curiosity is entirely genuine, but it is inextricably bound to his supreme arrogance. He doesn't want to rule the galaxy because he views the current state of the galaxy as fundamentally flawed. It's unworthy of ruling.
So the science is the ego trip.
Yes. His clinical obsession is the vehicle for his ego. He genuinely believes he is the singular mind capable of engineering the next stage of human evolution.
Right. If he cures the inherent weaknesses of biology, he forces humanity to transcend.
Exactly. And if he does that, he doesn't need a throne. He becomes the new god of creation by default.
Wow, that makes a terrifying amount of sense. He basically views himself as the sole enlightened mind in a galaxy of primitive apes just hitting each other with sticks.
That's exactly how he sees it.
But, you know, an enlightened mind in a laboratory is nothing without test subjects. Which brings us to the actual physical makeup of his faction. Who or what exactly constitutes the creations of Bile?
Because it's not like a standard army.
No, you don't just put up a flyer at the local spaceport asking for volunteers for agonizing genetic mutation.
You certainly do not.
Yeah.
The creations of Bile operate essentially as a chaos warband. So a rogue military force operating entirely outside the bounds of the Imperium.
Oh, yeah.
But they are completely distinct from almost every other fighting force in the 41st millennium. They are emphatically not a unified brotherhood.
Which is wild for a military force.
It is. Our sources describe them as a nightmarish collection of biological horrors and broken warriors. They have absolutely no shared history, no real loyalty to one another, and no deep-seated tradition.
Let's unpack that concept of brotherhood for a second, because I think it's really crucial for understanding how weird this faction actually is. Because throughout human history, from the Roman legions to modern Tier 1 special forces, brotherhood is the absolute bedrock of military cohesion.
It's what holds an army together.
Right. Shared history, shared trauma, a shared uniform that is what keeps soldiers from breaking ranks when the artillery starts falling. You fight for the person next to you. You fight for the regiment's honor.
Precisely. That is the esprit de corps. And in the Space Marine legions, this is taken to an absolute extreme. They are literally genetically modified to feel a familial bond with their brothers.
Oh, really? It's baked into their biology.
Yes, Their entire psychological conditioning is based on honor and loyalty to this specific chapter. But the creations of Bile are completely devoid of those traditional bonds.
So what holds them together then?
Well, the accounts we have explicitly refer to them as living experiments and disciples. So the connective tissue holding this army together isn't camaraderie, it's their mutual status as test subjects.
They are bound by their relation to the master.
Exactly. To the architect rather than to each other.
Okay, wait, let me stop you there and just challenge the logistics of this. Because theoretically, that sounds fascinating, but practically, how did that actually function on a battlefield?
It sounds like it should fall apart, right?
It really does. If you have an army with no loyalty to each other, no shared tradition, no honor, how is this not just a chaotic, useless mob that tears itself apart the second things get difficult?
That is the logical assumption to make.
I mean, if I'm a soldier and I don't care at all about the guy next to me and my commander is literally a mad scientist who might dissect me tomorrow morning, why don't I just run away?
Right.
How does a warband operate effectively when the soldiers are essentially just lab rats looking out for their own survival?
It's a brilliant point, and it's honestly what makes their operational capacity so terrifying. They don't tear themselves apart because Bile doesn't just alter their bodies. He alters their hierarchy of needs.
Wait, what do you mean?
You have to understand the underlying biological mechanisms in play here. Bile isn't just handing out weapons and pointing them at an enemy. He is fundamentally rewriting their nervous systems, their metabolisms, and their brain chemistry.
Oh, wow.
They operate effectively because they are bound by a shared, horrifying dependency. Let's look at the broken warriors mentioned in the source material for a second.
Yes, that phrase really stuck out to me. Broken warriors. What exactly does that mean in this context?
Okay, imagine a space marine from a traitor legion who has survived, say, 10,000 years of warfare in the warp.
And the warp is that dimension of pure mutating chaos.
Exactly. So this warrior has been defeated, his armor is shattered, his body is just ravaged by warp mutations that are slowly killing him or maybe driving him insane.
He's at rock bottom.
His mind is broken, his legion is totally scattered, all of his martial pride is just gone. And then Fabius Bile finds this warrior, and he offers a solution.
He can fix him.
He can stabilize the mutations. He can rebuild the shattered bone structure. He can essentially give this warrior power again. But the price is total, uncompromising subjugation to Bile's biological architecture.
So he takes these proud, ancient warriors who have literally lost everything, and he essentially turns them into biological clay.
Yes. He remakes them into living weapons.
But how does that guarantee loyalty?
Well, here is the mechanism that answers your question about why they don't run away. Bile doesn't just fix them once and let them go on their way. The alterations he makes require constant upkeep.
Oh, I see where this is going.
He creates bespoke biological systems that are chemically dependent on very specific serums and stabilizers that only he can synthesize.
Oh, that is so dark.
If they run away or if they disobey, their bodies will literally turn on them. Their newly augmented muscles might start consuming their own bone marrow. Their nervous systems might just plunge them into unimaginable agony.
So they don't fight for each other at all?
No, they fight because they are addicts. They are violently securing the raw materials their dealer needs so they can get their next fix.
Wow. That completely reframes the whole tragedy of the broken warrior. You lose your war, you lose your honor, and then in this desperate bid just to survive, you lose your very bodily autonomy.
You become a hostage in your own skin.
That is horrifying. And what about the non-Space Marine elements of the warband? The sources mention biological horrors. I know the lore talks a bit about things called gland hounds. What are those?
Gland hounds are a perfect example of his ground-up creations. They aren't rebuilt warriors. They are genetically engineered pack hunters.
Bred from what?
They are bred from human stock, but heavily, heavily mutated. And they are designed with specific biological imperatives. For instance, hunting down loyalist space marines specifically to rip out their progenoid glands.
Which is the gene seed we talked about earlier.
Exactly. And the crucial thing here is that they don't have to be taught loyalty. Loyalty and obedience to Bile are literally encoded into their DNA.
So they're basically just tools made of meat.
That is exactly what they are. So when you combine these chemically dependent super soldiers with genetically programmed mutant packs, you get a highly effective, utterly ruthless fighting force. and it requires absolutely no traditional military brotherhood to function.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the overarching philosophy of this faction, I think. Because it's one thing to have an army of biological addicts, but it's another to understand what they're actually trying to achieve on a macro scale.
All right, the end goal.
When we look at the philosophy of the test tube,
Yeah.
the accounts state point blank that the creations of Bile have no code of belief, no political goal, no honor.
None whatsoever.
They are defined entirely by the utterly amoral scientific drive of their creator and his clinical pursuit of genetic perfection.
That phrase, amoral scientific drive, is really the absolute crux of Bile's existence. Let's dissect what that actually means on a galactic scale.
Okay, let's do it.
If we look at typical antagonists, whether in historical conflicts or in vast sci-fi settings like Warhammer 40K, they're usually driven by motives we can fundamentally comprehend. Even if we abhor them, we understand them.
Right, they want territory, or they want wealth.
Or they are driven by ideological or religious dominance. They want you to bow to their specific dark god or adhere to their political system.
Exactly. Even the most evil empire in history usually just wants your land, your resources, or your submission. There is a logic to it.
But Bile's faction doesn't want any of that. They do not care about conquering a planet just to rule it.
Because governing a population is a waste of time to him.
Exactly. They just want the clinical process of experimentation. They want the raw data that is locked inside the cells of the planet's inhabitants. And what makes a purely clinical obsession uniquely terrifying is that it simply cannot be reasoned with.
And this is where the horror really clicks for me, because when you are dealing with a standard threat, there's usually a way to negotiate, right?
There's a dialogue to be had, usually.
Yeah. Most villains have a manifesto. You can read it, you can understand their motives, you can figure out what they want, maybe you can bribe them, or maybe, if things are truly desperate, you can just surrender.
You capitulate.
Right. You give them the territory, you pay the tribute, and they leave you alone. There is a transactional nature to normal conflict.
Yes, warfare usually has a political end state.
Exactly. But Fabius Bile doesn't have a manifesto. He just has a blood-stained lab notebook.
That's a great way to put it.
He doesn't want your city. He doesn't want your taxes. He doesn't want you to worship him. He wants to literally strap you to a surgical table and dissect you while you are fully conscious, just to observe how your pain receptors handle a new synthetic neurotoxin.
It's purely observational for him.
You just can't negotiate with someone who views you not as a person, not even as an enemy, but strictly as raw material for his next hypothesis.
The manifesto versus the lab notebook.
Yeah.
I love that analogy. It highlights the absolute dehumanization of his victims.
It really does.
And because his only goal is this clinical pursuit of genetic perfection, we also have to consider the shifting goalpost of that very concept.
What do you mean by shifting goalpost?
Well, perfection is not an objective endpoint in biology. It is entirely subjective, and it's highly adaptable to environment.
Oh, wait, that's a terrifying point. Because once you achieve one breakthrough, say, you engineer a lung that can breathe a specific toxic gas,
Right.
there's always another mutation to chase.
Exactly. Now you need a liver that can process industrial acid.
Then you need skin that can deflect radiation.
Exactly. Because perfection is an abstract, ever-receding horizon. His horrific work can literally never end.
It's impossible to finish.
There is no hypothetical point in the future where Fabius Bile will put down his scalpel, look at his creations, and say, "I'm finished. The work is done."
He'll always find something to tweak.
The experimentation is a perpetual motion machine of suffering. He will always find a perceived flaw to correct or a new biological mechanism to exploit.
So, if their only goal is this endless shifting pursuit of experimentation, how exactly is this chaotic web of science experiments organized out in the field?
That is where his other title comes into play.
Right, because if there's no military hierarchy, no chain of command in the traditional sense, how does a faction like this actually deploy across an entire galaxy? The moniker, the Spider, comes up a lot in the sources when describing him, and I think that's a very deliberate choice of words.
It is entirely deliberate, and it perfectly describes his organizational structure. The creations of Bile do not operate as a single top-down hierarchical force.
So no generals and sergeants.
You won't find a standard chain of command, no. Instead, it is a vast, decentralized network. It is a web.
I want to camp out on this idea of the web for a second, because a spider doesn't build a hierarchy, It builds a trap designed to entangle.
And then it just waits.
Yeah, it sits in the center, perfectly still, just feeling the vibrations of whatever gets caught in the silk.
That is precisely the architectural design of his faction. At the absolute center is Bile, along with a group of his most devoted acolytes, which are often referred to as the consortium.
The consortium, like a dark medical board.
A twisted mirror of a medical board, exactly. Radiating out from them are countless specialized units, independent warbands, and augmented monstrosities.
And how does that make them effective?
Well, the lack of a rigid hierarchy makes them incredibly unpredictable. If you are fighting a standard army, you can target their supply lines, right? Their communication relays, their headquarters. You can predict their tactical movements.
Because they have to follow orders.
But how do you predict the movements of a web of autonomous biological horrors operating on their own twisted hypotheses?
You can't. But the lore also mentions that this web is held together by, quote, desperate bargains.
Yes, that's a very important phrase in the texts.
Let's dig into that. Why on earth would anyone willingly strike a bargain with this guy? If you know his reputation, that he is a completely amoral scientist who views literally everyone as a potential petri dish, why wouldn't you just stay as far away from him as possible?
Because, in the Eye of Terror, the warp-infused region of space where these chaos factions reside survival often requires making deals with devils.
Out of pure necessity.
Exactly. We discussed the chemically independent soldiers earlier,
Yeah.
but Bile also operates on a macro level as essentially the premier biological mercenary in the galaxy.
So he takes contracts.
He does. Let's say you are a Chaos Lord commanding a massive fleet. Your elite troops are succumbing to rampant, uncontrollable warp mutations. They are turning into mindless spawn. You are losing your army, and therefore your power.
You have no other options.
Bile comes to you and offers a desperate bargain. He'll provide the genetic stabilizers needed to halt the mutations in your troops.
But what is the currency? I doubt he takes standard Imperium credits.
Oh no, the currency is flesh. The Chaos Lord must pay him in captives, or maybe in rare genetic samples stolen from Imperial worlds, or perhaps by allowing Bile to take a tithe of the Lord's own warriors back to his vats.
Ooh.
It is a terrifying gig economy of evil.
That is so deeply unsettling. It's like modern-day biopiracy, but instead of stealing agricultural patents or like rare plant DNA, they are stealing human beings and genetic legacies.
Exactly like that.
Every Chaos Lord is essentially an independent contractor, making a desperate, one-off deal with the most sadistic biological CEO imaginable. Like, I will go harvest 1,000 Imperial citizens for you if you just give me the serum that stops my spine from growing out of my chest.
And this leads us to the concept of horrifying loyalty that holds his innermost circle together. It is very different from those transactional desperate bargains.
Right, because the consortium acolytes are actually loyal to him.
For those who fully submit to his teachings, particularly those medical acolytes in the consortium, their loyalty isn't just transactional. It is pathological.
How does that differ from regular loyalty? I mean, if I am loyal to a cause, I might die for it. How does loyalty become horrifying?
Well, regular loyalty is born of respect or shared ideals or love. It is a choice that honors the autonomy of the individual making it.
You choose to be loyal.
Yes. Horrifying loyalty circumvents free will entirely. It is akin to a cellular-level Stockholm syndrome.
Cellular-level Stockholm syndrome, wow.
When a creator breaks you down to a molecular level, isolates your pain receptors, rebuilds your muscle fibers, and essentially writes his personal signature onto your DNA, you develop a warped, godlike reverence for him.
Because he literally made you who you are.
Your very existence, every breath you take, is a testament to his will. You are loyal because you physically and psychologically cannot conceptualize an existence outside of his design. You are his art.
That is profoundly dark. You aren't just enslaved. You are engineered to love the chains.
Perfectly said.
But a spider needs to eat, you know? A web is only useful if it catches flies. And a scientist, especially one working on this colossal galactic scale, needs constant raw materials.
Constant.
You don't just conjure complex DNA out of thin air, you need fresh samples. So where does Bile get the raw materials for these endless, continuous experiments?
This brings us to the operational history of the warband, and it honestly might be the most gruesome aspect of their lore.
Okay, brace ourselves.
The records show that the creations of Bile have been present at some of the most twisted and pivotal military events of the 41st millennium. But here is the catch.
Yeah.
They aren't there for the reasons everyone else is.
They aren't there to win the war.
No. Their involvement serves one singular goal: the mass acquisition of genetic material.
Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. To everyone else in this universe, the Imperium of Man defending their worlds, the various alien factions expanding their empires, the other forces of chaos trying to tear down reality, these pivotal events are epic, sweeping battles.
Yes, they are fighting for survival, for territory, for deep-seated ideologies.
Right. They're writing the history of the galaxy in blood. The stakes are total annihilation or supreme victory.
Absolutely.
But to the creations of Bile, these aren't historic battles at all. They're just harvesting runs.
Exactly. It completely recontextualizes the very concept of war.
It totally does.
Imagine the epic sieges, the heroic last stands where soldiers are sacrificing themselves to hold a line against impossible odds. Think about the valor, the tragedy, the sheer meaning of it all.
Right.
Bile looks at all of this and just sees a massive, violent centrifuge separating the wheat from the chaff. He sees raw data generating itself.
It reminds me of the Victorian grave robbers, the resurrection men.
Oh, that's a great historical parallel.
Yeah, because in the 18th and 19th centuries, the study of anatomy was exploding, but medical schools were legally only allowed to dissect the bodies of executed criminals.
Which created a shortage of bodies.
Exactly. So a massive black market sprang up. Men like Burke and Hare, or the gangs that supplied Dr. Robert Knox, they would go into graveyards in the dead of night and dig up fresh corpses to sell to the anatomists.
Right.
There are even stories of people scavenging teeth and bones from the battlefields of Waterloo. Bile is basically doing that, but on a galactic, industrialized scale.
That is a highly accurate and disturbing parallel. Bile is the ultimate resurrection man. But instead of sneaking into a graveyard at midnight, he deploys drop pods of glandhounds into the middle of an active war zone.
He doesn't wait for the battle to end.
No, he waits for the greatest heroes of the Imperium to fall in battle. And before their brothers can even recover their bodies, Bile's surgical strike teams descend.
Oh, that's awful.
They saw right through the power armor, extract the progenoid glands, harvest the mutated organs, and vanish back into the web before anyone knows what happened.
It highlights a profound, almost cosmic level of disrespect.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah. Because what does this continuous, horrifying work actually mean for the soldiers fighting in this galaxy? It means that no grave is sacred.
Nothing is sacred to him.
A legendary hero can fight for a century, lay down his life to save 1 billion souls, and instead of receiving a hero's rest or having his gene seed preserved to create the next generation of defenders, his body is just dragged off to a dark laboratory.
And his genetic legacy is spliced into some screaming nightmare creature.
It is the ultimate desecration.
But reducing these heroic sacrifices to mere biological salvage, Bile strips away the narrative of honor that sustains the Imperium.
You aren't a martyr anymore.
No, you are just a highly valuable line item in Bile's inventory spreadsheet. This utter nihilism, this reduction of the sacred to the mundane, is what makes his faction so profoundly unsettling.
And I think that leads us directly to the culmination of this deep dive.
The overarching theme.
Yes, we have to address why this specific brand of evil strikes at the very core of human fear within this setting. Because the accounts conclude by asserting that the creations of Bile embody the Imperium's greatest, most deeply buried fear.
Which is the power to create life, twisted into the most grotesque form of evil.
Right. The texts state that the true terror of the 41st millennium isn't the alien swarm devouring a planet. It isn't the heretic praying to dark gods. The true terror is the boundless ambition of a mad scientist.
The greatest threat to humanity's soul is in a test tube.
Yes. Let's unpack this philosophical climax. Why is a scientist with a scalpel scarier than an alien with a biological cannon?
To understand that, we have to look at the hierarchy of fears within the human psyche and how the Imperium of Man categorizes threats.
Okay, let's break that down.
An alien like an orc or a Tyranid in this lore is an external danger. It is the classic other.
Right, it's outside the walls.
It is terrifying, yes, but it's a terror we can understand. We can rally together, build a wall, and fire weapons at the other. It's a unifying threat.
Right, it unites us. And a heretic, like someone who turns to chaos.
A heretic represents a spiritual failure. It is someone who is weak, who turned their back on the rules of society, and embraced dark magic.
It's dangerous, but again, it's a recognizable human failing. We understand temptation and corruption.
Precisely. But a mad scientist, that represents something far more insidious. It represents the corruption of humanity's greatest intrinsic gifts.
Our intellect.
Exactly. What separates humanity from the beasts? It is our intellect, our logic, our ability to apply the scientific method, and our power to create.
We use science for everything good, usually.
We use science to cure diseases, to build void ships, to terraform worlds. When that very logic, the absolute highest function of the human mind, is stripped of empathy and weaponized against us, it is a perversion from within.
It feels like a betrayal.
It feels like an existential betrayal of our own potential.
So I want to challenge this idea, just to play devil's advocate for a moment, if I can.
Go for it.
We live in a world, our real world, where we rely on science for everything. We trust the scientific method. Isn't it incredibly pessimistic for the lore to suggest that the greatest threat to the human soul comes from a test tube?
That's a very fair question.
Shouldn't the greatest threat be ignorance or blind hatred? Why is the pursuit of knowledge painted as the ultimate evil here?
It is not the pursuit of knowledge itself that is evil. It is the methodology and the total absence of a moral framework. You bring up a vital point about trust.
We have to trust science.
And it is exactly because we trust science, because we view it as the ultimate arbiter of truth and progress, that its corruption is the ultimate betrayal. Science, in its purest form, is just a tool. It is objective.
Right.
But when you remove the moral compass, when you remove the ethical considerations of how you gather data and what you do with it, science inherently treats life as mere data.
Just numbers on a page, variables in an equation.
Yes. And this is where we get to the core of the Imperium's terror. By reducing humanity, or any living being, to just a sequence of genes to be spliced, perfected, and discarded, Bile fundamentally denies the existence of the soul.
He doesn't believe in it.
Not at all. In the worldview of the Imperium, humanity is sacred, the human form is divine. But to Fabius Bile, the soul doesn't exist.
It's just chemistry to him.
Love, honor, sacrifice, faith, these are just chemical reactions in the brain, evolutionary quirks that he can switch on or off with the right glandular secretion. He reduces the ineffable spiritual essence of a person to mere meat and chemistry.
That is the ultimate degradation. You don't just kill someone, you erase the very concept of their humanity.
You erase their meaning.
You turn them into an object that can be chopped up and repurposed. And when you have an entire warband, a vast, decentralized web of horrifying creations operating on that exact philosophy, sweeping across the galaxy with their scalpels and extraction vials.
That's horrifying.
Yeah, that is definitely more terrifying than an alien swarm. The alien just wants to eat you. Fabius Bile wants to unmake the very concept of what you are.
It is the terror of extreme, unfeeling rationality applied to the chaos of life. Fabius Bile is a mirror, reflecting what happens when ambition entirely eclipses empathy.
He's a cautionary tale.
He is the ultimate cautionary tale of intellect, devoid of wisdom.
We have covered a massive amount of incredibly dark, complex ground today. It's fascinating how a deep dive into biological horror actually becomes a philosophical discussion about the nature of humanity itself.
But the best sci-fi usually does.
It really does. So to recap the journey we've taken through these accounts today, we started by looking at the traditional foundational ideas of warfare, brotherhood, loyalty, causes worth dying for.
And we watched as Fabius Bile, the Dark Apothecary, systematically dismantled all of them.
Completely dismantled them. He replaced the sacred brotherhood of the Space Marines with a decentralized web of broken, chemically addicted test subjects.
He replaced ideological warfare with the amoral clinical pursuit of genetic raw materials,
turning historic battles into grotesque harvesting runs. And he built a gig economy of evil, proving that the deepest threat to humanity isn't lurking out there in the dark void of space. It's the corruption of our own brilliant minds.
It serves as a stark, visceral reminder that creation without morality inevitably leads to monstrosity. When we forget the humanity of our subjects, the science itself becomes an atrocity.
Absolutely. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to chew on. Something that exploring all this lore led me to consider, even if it wasn't explicitly stated in the texts we reviewed.
Oh, I'm sure.
We know that Bile is in a clinical, obsessive pursuit of genetic perfection. He is constantly splicing, mutating, trying to build the ultimate biological organism capable of thriving in a hostile universe.
Right, that's his whole drive.
But if you look at the 41st millennium, it is a universe defined by endless brutality, constant war, flesh-tearing aliens, and absolute literal chaos bleeding from other dimensions.
It's arguably the worst place to live in all of fiction.
Exactly. So, what if his definition of perfection is actually right?
Oh, that is a deeply unsettling hypothesis to entertain.
Think about it. What if, in a universe that has gone completely irrevocably mad, things like empathy, honor, and a rigid moral compass are actually evolutionary dead ends?
Because they make you vulnerable.
Yes. What if, to survive in a galaxy of total unending war, Bile's nightmarish, amoral biological horrors are actually the only evolutionary path capable of enduring long term. What if, when the universe itself is a monster manufactured in a laboratory is exactly what perfection looks like?
If that is true, if adaptation requires the shedding of our humanity, then Fabius Bile isn't a madman at all. He's the only realist left in the galaxy.
Wow.
And I'm genuinely not sure which of those two possibilities is more frightening.
It's the kind of thought that stays with you long after the lights go out. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the darkest, most twisted corners of our sources today. We always appreciate taking these complex, slightly terrifying concepts and unpacking them with you. Keep questioning what you read, keep exploring the lore, and maybe be just a little extra thankful for the medical professionals in our own world today. Until next time, stay curious.